Just a note to your viewers about how this is being justified here in the West. Listening to the BBC Radio 5, which is a national rolling news channel here in Britain, they had various speakers on justifying the use of assassination techniques, saying how beneficial it can be. And of course, I tried to phone up to get onto the radio to say, look, if you start using assassination techniques, you can start wars. The First World War was started with the assassination of Prince Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo. This is extremely dangerous, and it's also a war crime. So why is the BBC saying that this is a good thing? At least they're bringing guests on who are saying these things. Of course, they're not bringing on guests who are saying with voices of moderation and voices of upholding international law. I mean, I think Netanyahu's speech today has been really extraordinary. Looking at what he's trying to say, I mean, he's addressing the people of Iran, which is rather interesting. The idea that he's not really interested in his own people because they're protesting against him. Certainly the Lebanese are not really going to be listening to him, nor the Palestinians right now, nor I would argue most of the Middle East. But he thinks that he can address the people of Iran and persuade them that their own government is no good. Well, hang on, is he trying to overturn the revolution of 1979 single-handed? I mean, he really does seem to have lost the plot. So if you think about what he's been saying over the last year or so, particularly with he's going to destroy Hamas, well, he's not done that. He's made it stronger. His troops have actually started to fail on the ground, even though they've got massive advantage in terms of US munitions, firepower, air power, missiles, etc., to fire at these innocent, ordinary people in Gaza, who they are occupying, by the way, an occupying force that tries to paint itself as the victim, which is really unbelievable. So now he's saying, well, actually, all of the Lebanese are going to have to suffer because of Hezbollah. So he's doing the same now to Lebanon as he's done to Gaza, and he's trying to do the same to Iran as well. He's painting himself as the leader of the Middle East, the only leader of the Middle East. The only thing is, of course, for anybody who's actually paying attention, that is to say most people, the indigenous people of the Middle East, who Benjamin Netanyahu's family are very recent arrivals there, they know exactly what's going on. They're never going to let him be a leader in that part of the world, because he is one of the most dangerous people who's ever walked the face of planet Earth, especially because of his nuclear weapons that he keeps up behind his back. And so that's the real danger, I think, right now, is that these Israeli leadership have painted themselves into a corner where what they're coming out with is a desperate attempt to use the press, to use the media, in order to convince a few of the stupid people in the West, the most stupid people, that they still have some credibility. Most of the people watching this around the world, including many British journalists, I can assure you, are looking at this man and thinking the guy is losing the plot. He's lost touch with the reality. He's never going to be the ruler of the Middle East. It almost seems as if he's been talking about overthrowing Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the government of Iran. Where's he going to stop next? Is he going to try and overthrow the government of Syria, Iraq, Yemen, Jordan? Where is this man going to stop? He needs to be stopped. It's quite obvious. The whole world can see this man has to be literally taken from power, potentially put on trial or whatever. But he is an incredibly dangerous man, because if you look at the way he's trying to explain what is going on in the Middle East, it's got no basis in fact or reality. All it is a dangerous delusion that he is right when actually he is a genocidal maniac. And you look at it, he's almost more unhinged than Adolf Hitler. Even Hitler managed to persuade his own people that he was doing the right thing, even if he didn't persuade the Czechoslovaks, the French, etc. Yeah, he really is. He's completely lost it. He talks about money for war, that the Iran's spending far too much money. Well, the reason that Iran is having to do that is because of the threats that have been coming for him for decades. Like literally from him personally, Netanyahu has been threatening, and it's not just been threatening. He's been making acts of war against Iran. In other words, by assassinations within Iran, many nuclear scientists, politicians, terrorism within Iran, blowing up many bombs over the years, the infamous attempts to kill the entire government of Iran. So that's why, and if he was to just back off and stop doing this, and the Israelis were to stop, then the money would be there for all the basic social services, the sewage systems, as he was saying. So he really has lost touch with reality. I'm not sure how many people around the world actually believe anything he says anymore, and they're actually beginning to laugh at him, because the idea, I think, is to try and scare people. So you've got on the ground and in the military, you've got the United States, the Western allies, propping up the Israeli military, and this guy is almost sent out like a very dangerous figure, a mad figure, a madman. In fact, isn't it? It's Moshe Dayan said this, didn't he? The Israeli general. Israel's got to be like a mad dog, too dangerous to bother. Well, I'm afraid the time is coming when people will be bothering with him, because I think he's been sent out really to try and make everybody afraid. He's threatening this, he's threatening that. He's saying we can get anywhere in the whole of the Middle East, we can kill anybody. He's basically threatening. And it's quite clear that most of the people watching this are thinking this man's time is coming to an end. He can't carry on like this, because he's pushing things much too far.
And it seems, Tony, that the regime really thinks that they can murder, maim, and massacre themselves into legitimacy.
Of course they can't. Of course they can't. And I would imagine there are a lot of people actually within the Israeli military who also have great misgivings, because what he's doing is I mean, for example, he's trying to fight this battle on so many fronts. He's pushing his military to be in every place at once. Now he's going to make them very extremely thin on the ground, isn't he? So I mean, look at these territorial claims, for example, up in the north of Israel and the south of Lebanon. They're saying that we want to we're going to have to invade Lebanon in order to make the north of Israel safe for people to return to their homes. Well, what about the Golan Heights? This is up in it's actually part of Syria officially, but the Israelis have taken it as a way of sort of overlooking Lebanon. This is not their territory that they're sitting on. In fact, so much of their territory is occupied territory. It's not theirs at all. And so, you know, he's talking about this pitch to lead the Middle East, and you know, this is going to be my legacy. I'm going to be the one who will clear out all these dangerous terrorists. Of course, he himself, it's like the emperor with no clothes on. He himself is the most dangerous force in the Middle East, and of course, a terrorist, an assassin. And the people he's been killing, it's quite worrying to look at. Look, Nasrallah, I'm sure the man's got his faults, but he's a spiritual leader. He's not really a military leader. He's obviously, his party has been elected into the ruling coalition of Lebanon by a proper election. This is the person that takes a share of the power, or did, in Lebanon. And yet they're saying that we don't want this party. So what they're doing effectively is trying to interfere in the democratic politics of surrounding nations. And this is, of course, a war crime, particularly by using assassination of a technique. And it's a very arrogant attempt to use the media too. His speech supposedly to the Iranian people. Because here in the West, Netanyahu is just about the only Middle Eastern leader that is not censored here in the West. So every time he's at the United Nations, we see him speaking on our TV screens. You know, he's always up there again and again. And yet, when did we last hear a speech from Nasrallah, Hassan Nasrallah, on British television? Never. Never. Iranian leaders, never. Maybe a kind of a half a sentence soundbite here and there, taken out of context. But this is so, I mean, it's laughable to see that he thinks that he can speak to the Iranian people and persuade them that the revolution was a waste of time. And I mean, really, I'm afraid the guy has completely lost the plot.
I mean, when it comes to, I mean, you've been on the, you've been on Benjamin Netanyahu for a good part of your speech there, your initial take, Tony. So when when you're Benjamin Netanyahu and everyone at the UN, at the General Assembly, you very well saw, walks out on you, perhaps they don't buy your narrative, your justifications for your actions over the past 11 plus months, over the past 75 years or so, or maybe they just don't like you, or perhaps both. But I mean, how does it not have an impact if you call yourself a leader of a government? How does that not impact you when so many world leaders, Tony, walk out on you at the UN?
Well, I think it's because the man is a megalomaniac. You know, really, he's ill. You know, he's not able to empathize with 99% of the world's population. Only his own supporters at home. He doesn't even listen to Jewish people at home who are calling for him to resign. Only listens to his own supporters. And of course, this is a nuclear-armed doomsday cult he's running here, because he seems to think that he can take the entire Middle East on and win. And one does wonder whether he's trying to persuade the rest of the world onto his cause. I mean, he's doing the best possible job, it seems to me, to persuade the rest of the world that they should have nothing more to do with the Israelis. And it was excellent to see them all on Friday walking out of the United Nations General Assembly as he took to the stage. And the reason that people are doing that is because, number one, they don't believe him, and number two, they don't want to listen to somebody who's actually a war criminal. And of course, he then actually at the United Nations ordered the strikes on southern Beirut and murdered, assassinated Hassan Nasrallah from the United Nations. Now, this, you know, you would hear the BBC people here in Britain calling this an audacious thing to do. No, he should have had the security guards at the United Nations come round and arrest him there and then for committing war crimes on UN property. So that's the sort of person that he is. And of course, there are even equally maniacal people also there in Israel. It's very difficult to see how these people are going to be put back in their box, except by their own population. And I think there are many increasing numbers of Israelis. You know, there are lots of fanatics. I would say something like 3/4 of the Israeli population are racist. They've been brought up that way. And in a way, I feel sorry for them. It's not their fault. They were taught this racism at school from a very early age. This is this Shabbat Lubavitch type of education. It's rather similar, in fact, to the Wahhabist education, which the Saudis paid a lot of money for, which was given to many people who ended up as Islamist terrorists, joined groups like al-Nusra, joined groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda, which were just tools of the West and the West. And this, of course, is another very important reason why they wanted Nasrallah dead, is because the Hezbollah was so successful in destroying many of these Western proxy Islamist organizations, which, of course, for many people don't know, that the whole Operation Cyclone started in the 1980s in Afghanistan. This was a MI6 CIA operation to fund maniacal so-called Muslims. In fact, what they were doing, basically just giving them guns and saying, come on, let's kill some Russians. And that's how it started. But this is there is a similar thing going on within Israel itself, with young people educated to be racist. But there are still many Israelis who can see exactly what's going on. Many of them actually are getting on flights out of the country because they can see that the most dangerous threat actually to the state of Israel is nothing to do with the surrounding indigenous people. It's Netanyahu, Ben-Gvir, Smotrich, and the far-right bloc that's now running the country.
Just moments ago, in a statement, Hezbollah said that the group has fired rockets at Israeli military positions in the occupied Golan Heights. It also said it fired long-range anti-ship cruise missile at Kafr Giladi. That's a rural cooperative community known as a kibbutz. It also targeted a settlement in northern Israel with a salvo of rockets, according to the resistance movement. In a separate statement, it said it fired 51 missiles at areas in northern occupied territories close to Haifa. Meanwhile, the Zionist entity says it has detected nearly a dozen rockets fired from Lebanon toward northern occupied territories, and that some have been intercepted. Tony, you heard the Israelis over the last nearly year now saying that they're going to stop Hamas in Gaza. You've seen what they've done to Gaza, what they've done to the people of Gaza, and now what should our concerns be? They're saying they're going to put an end to Hezbollah, and if they couldn't put an end to Hamas, and Hamas's military capacity and capabilities are just a fraction of what Hezbollah's are. And now, does that mean that we have to brace ourselves for another onslaught against the civilians of Lebanon?
Well, yes, quite possibly, because things have hit a bit of a cul-de-sac, haven't they? In Gaza, the Israelis haven't really achieved any of their aims. They know that the more they bomb, the more hostages will be killed, the more people will be recruited to Hamas, to join Hamas, to fight them. And yeah, so that's basically what the situation is, I'm afraid, where they look as if, I would suggest it's very unlikely the Israelis will really want to go in on the ground with their infantry and their armor into southern Lebanon, because they can do a lot more killing using the American satellites, using the targeting technology, modern technology, where they can do things like follow people's mobile phones, they can follow other electronic devices around, and they can target them, knowing that there will be someone in possession of that device. And so that's, I think, much more the sort of thing the Israelis are thinking about here. Their armed forces are a little bit thin. They can't be everywhere at once, and so that to me is much more likely. I think there's a lot of scaremongering around this. Well, who knows? Maybe they will. But one thing's for certain: they are trying to start a regional war. They're desperate to start it because they know then that would bring in the Americans to their aid. And of course, that's also what the Americans I mean, they're much more just like during the Yom Kippur War in the 1970s. This is the sort of thing that that's their game plan. But the idea that they're going to do all this on their own, I think, is very unlikely. The leadership, I think, doesn't actually appeal to its own people very successfully. Many Jewish people are extremely smart, and they can see when their leadership is starting to lose it, as Netanyahu is. I'm not to say he's not dangerous. He's extremely dangerous. But this assassination technique, which, by the way, there's a U.S. assassination, CIA assassination manual, which it looks as if Netanyahu is basically just picked up and read and is using this, which is put out by WikiLeaks on their Twitter feed earlier on today. And by the way, Julian Assange is going to be appearing tomorrow. I'm sure he'll have something to say about all of this. Maybe only a little bit, but he's talking about press freedom, by the way, in Brussels tomorrow. This is the sort of thing that WikiLeaks has really started to do again. Now Julian Assange is free. We've seen WikiLeaks really picking up and doing much more interesting, because they've been spending, many of the team, been spending a lot of their time trying to make sure he's freed. And now he has been freed. They're putting a lot of effort into getting him pardoned because, of course, he didn't commit any crimes. He was exposing war crimes by the US military mainly and other militaries, and also exposing agendas that are going on diplomatically, they hoped secretly behind the scenes. So that will be very interesting to see tomorrow. But no, the WikiLeaks have been doing this sort of thing for a long time, revealing that actually much of the impetus and the tactics for what the Netanyahu's doing, it comes straight out of Langley, Virginia, CIA headquarters.
And when you say the regime is looking for regional war, Tony, and they're trying to pull the U.S. Into it, to what end? I mean, I've read up so many different takes by so many different analysts and critics as to what the ultimate goal of the regime would be, to try to pull the U.S., perhaps the British, the French, and the German into some kind of regional war, possibly some kind of a world war for that matter. But let's say it does culminate. All of this culminates into that, and that is realized. I mean, and as of late, the U.S. hasn't really been the embodiment of military success in the region, has it? But nevertheless, if that day did come and the leaders in Tel Aviv were successful in starting a regional conflict and pulling all their allies into it, what would they have a uniform objective, and what do you think it would be?
That's a really good question, and it never gets asked in the West here. Thank you for asking me. I should have maybe have said something about that anyway. But the objectives, I think, are twofold. We've got an absolute economic meltdown in the West. The privatization programs, the neoliberal programs, the monetarism introduced by Reagan and Thatcher has proved to be an absolute disaster here. So, for example, in Britain, we've got the most expensive electricity in the world. The only people who are able to afford it, pretty much, are those who've got shares, have the money to buy shares in the electricity company, because their dividends from the shares will pay their electricity bill. But the electricity bills are going through the roof, and many businesses are folding. The government doesn't seem to be interested in small businesses at all. So we've got an economic nightmare. There's nowhere near enough tax take, really, for the government. And so what they've been doing is basically pandering to the wishes of these massive multinational corporations. And they just get their way. And they get very, very little, taxed very little. So you can see there's an economic problem, an enormous economic problem. The answer to it all is going to be some kind of digital currency system, programmable money. That's what they want to bring in. But of course, this is not going to be possible without an enormous conflagration. They can't just bring that sort of massive control over the way people spend their money. For example, telling them that you can't use your wealth for this, you can't use it for that, you can for this, you can't travel. This is actually largely this kind of similar to this social credit system that they've got in China. So that's what they want to bring in, but they need to have a conflagration, a massive upheaval, like Naomi Klein's shock doctrine, in order to bring their new financial system in on the back of it. But then there is also this other aspect which is the spiritual aspect to it all. Which is basically elites, financial elites, really don't like the moral values that come along with the biblical Abrahamic faiths and the Quran. They hate them. And in fact, in a way, there are two different systems here. So we've got, on the one hand, we've got this spiritual idea of balance. You've got to have a bit of good and a bit of evil. This is the sort of old Eastern religions and things like Hinduism, etc. And then there's the Abrahamic faiths based on the Torah and the Old Testament of the Jews, as the Christians and Muslims both base much of their spiritual values on that, which is a fight between good and evil, honesty and lies. And I think it's quite obvious to most people now that what we're seeing is not a kind of balance between right and wrong, good and evil. We're seeing a battle going on between people with honesty and integrity, people who value human life, and others that don't. They don't value human life, but what they do value is the rule of money and wealth and power over others. And so that, I think, is the other side of all of this, is they want a conflagration in order to, as an attempt to discredit the Islam, to discredit Judaism. Of course, the Zionists are a million miles away from Judaism, particularly by the way they act. And all you need to do is listen to people like Rabbi Weiss, who will tell you all about how anti-Jewish Zionism is. He's from the Neturei Charta, and we have another chapter of Neturei Charta in London, here in the UK. And so that's the object, is to set up as a bigger war as possible between the Islamic world, the Christian world in the Middle East, actually to a lesser extent the Jewish world, because many ordinary Jews have integrated into their own countries around, but they're very controlled within Israel itself. And so that's the idea, it seems to me, is to start this, bring in their own kind of religion, a kind of New Age religion afterwards. But of course they're going to fail. They're going to fail. And more and more people are cottoning on to the evil of what Netanyahu, our own leader here in Britain, Keir Starmer, Sir Keir Starmer, he was speaking at the Labour Party conference last week, and a young 18-year-old boy in the middle of his speech stood up and started shouting at him, "You're a hypocrite, you're a hypocrite," because he's talking about he wants a ceasefire, and this young lad has started screaming out at the top of your voice, "Then cut off the arms to Israel then." And so you've got it even within the heart of the ruling Labour political party, people making these noises and making a protest because they can see what our political leaders are doing by supporting the Israeli, particularly with money and arms, is at the heart of what's going on. So that's why we have these massive hundreds of thousands of people out on the streets of London week after week protesting in favour of the Palestinians, because 90% of Brits can see exactly what's going on and support the Palestinians, support the Lebanese 100%. There's a tiny minority in these elite institutions, in the universities, in the media, in the political parties, all of which have been bought up by finance capitalism, because they just clear out anybody who's got a different point of view. So there's a tiny elite minority that are supporting the Israelis. It's up to the rest of us here, to get rid of them, basically, and to cut off. Because if that money from the United States was cut off, that's going to Israel, if the arms supplies were cut off to Israel, Netanyahu wouldn't have a leg to stand on. He'd have to strut off the stage and into a jail cell.
And that's the thing, Tony, because a few times this week we saw the U.S. President Joe Biden saying things like, we, meaning the Americans, don't agree with a ground invasion. We need a ceasefire now. We don't need escalation in Lebanon. If he is really sincere, if that's really his position, and he has so many tools at his disposal that he could basically, employ to basically express that opposition, and he doesn't that make him look weaker? Either don't say anything, stand by, let your ally do what it's doing, make no comments. But if you're going to consistently show strong opposition to what Benjamin Netanyahu and his cabinet are doing in Gaza against the Palestinian civilian population there and to the infrastructure, and then now you're really that concerned about a possible repetition of that in Lebanon, and you do nothing about it, not even threaten to cut off a fraction of the arms shipments to the regime, doesn't that make you look awful as supposedly the captain and chief of the strongest military force in the world today?
Well, of course, the strongest military force in the world is not necessarily known. The Chinese could be the Russians, because an army marches on its morale and whether it's doing the right thing. This is one of the things that helped beat Hitler, was many of the soldiers fighting him were fighting for their kids' future. In fact, by backing Netanyahu, by backing this genocide, and actually I think also by backing the Nazis in Ukraine, many of our leaders are just betraying all of these war memorials we've got across our country, thousands of them in every village, town. The memories of the people there, written on those in stone, are being betrayed as we speak. And I think you will also have to remember that some of the scriptures, I don't know how much well you know that the New Testament, the Christian canon, but in the book of Revelation, it's very clear about this group called the Synagogue of Satan. And this is spoken to the Apostle John when he was exiled on the island of Patmos. He made it absolutely clear, beware of the synagogue of Satan. And he also says, but do not be afraid of them, because you will know that I have loved you. That's Christ speaking through John in the scriptural books, and so it's all spelt out there. I would suggest people, not just the Quran, not just the Torah, the Tanakh, as the Jews call it, dust off your Bibles, folks, dust off your Qurans, because a lot of this stuff is, I mean, basically the difference between right and wrong, the sort of malign forces that the Bible talks about appearing in the future to threaten mankind. But actually, at the end of the day, many of us may not be here to see it, but whatever happens, and it may not be now, I'm not saying this is happening now, may be long in the future, but I think we need to keep the faith and understand that the ordinary individuals like the Palestinians have got the right attitude. Just stay tough, and don't, this is a key thing, do not rise to the bait. What they're trying to do is prod, using Netanyahu and his TV speeches, for example, to get everybody angry and annoyed. Actually, at the end of the day, when assassinations happen, it's a small number of people. Obviously, in Gaza, it's been a far more, and actually now in Lebanon, far more. And in other conflicts, many more people, ordinary individuals, have been being killed. But I think many people have the understanding that, okay, so a few leaders have been killed. Actually, you're never going to kill the spirit of the nation. You're never going to kill the spirit of Lebanon. You're never going to kill the spirit of Iran. And you're never actually going to kill the spirit of Britain, because we are a fair-minded people as ordinary people, and most Brits can see exactly what's going on. That's why they've been turning out in London in their hundreds of thousands to support the Palestinians.
And there are a lot of people that thought Keir Starmer might be, I don't want to say pro-Palestinian, but a lot less pro-Israel than he's basically come into office and shown, especially throughout this onslaught in Gaza and now with this escalation into Lebanon. Maybe it's fair to say you can never expect more from a Western leader, but what's the take right now when it comes to Downing Street, their take on all the escalatory stuff by the Zionist entity in the region, especially for those last 7 days in Lebanon, because there's not a lot coming out of the authorities in the UK as much as there is coming out of perhaps the States?
Well, look, I think most of the focus in the British cabinet is with the European war that the British have been supporting. Obviously, Britain itself handed over that land after Allenby took it in the First World War, the British general, over to the new Israeli state in 1948. But please do remember that actually a lot of British soldiers were killed by the Israeli terrorists at the time, the Stern gang and that lot. And so there is this sort of community memory amongst the grandfathers and the fathers of those who are now in charge in Britain, that there has been an insurgency and a lot of murderous. I mean, the attack on the King David Hotel, for example, which killed so many British officers back in the time of the British occupation of Palestine. But at the end of the day, I think we just have to simply admit that this is a fight between right and wrong, between good and evil, and just clarify it like that. I don't see that being really spoken much about in the West. They're trying to say, well, this is a terrorist, Nasrallah is a terrorist, and this is a democratic government. I think most people around the world can see right through that.
Okay, Tony, good stuff. Stay safe. Thank you, pal, for spending so much time and